The chapel smelled like lilies and wet wool, and the name on the program was my brother's. Pastor Nathan Graham said, "We gather for Michael Mercer." The door behind the floral spray cracked, and a baby cried. My chest locked. Thomas Avery said, "Please remain seated." The sound cut through the hymn like glass through water. I stared at the casket and felt the room tilt. Aaron Mercer said, "That's a baby here." The mourners looked anywhere but at me. The cry rose again, thin and fierce, as if grief had learned a new language. I moved and hands reached to stop me, but I shrugged them off. Aaron Mercer said, "Michael would have gone." I pushed through the door into the corridor, where the air was colder and honest. The cry echoed down the hall, and every step felt like trespass. Behind me, the hymn faltered. Ahead, something waited with my name already inside it. The corridor led to a side room with a warmer lamp and a nurse hunched over a bundle, and the cry snapped into a rhythm that matched my pulse. Nurse Elena Park said, "You should not be back here." I tasted metal and could not answer. The bundle shifted, and a fist found the air. Aaron Mercer said, "Whose child is that?" She studied my face like a chart she did not want to read. Nurse Elena Park said, "He was left with a note." The paper trembled in her hand. Aaron Mercer said, "Read it." She cleared her throat, and the room shrank around the sound. Nurse Elena Park said, "For Aaron Mercer. His name is Michael." I felt the floor jump like a bridge in crosswind. The baby hiccuped and went quiet, and silence crashed louder than any hymn. By morning, the courthouse smelled of coffee and bleach, and my name was stamped on forms that felt heavier than law. Judge Lila Hart said, "There is a preliminary DNA match." Marcus Reed sat 2 rows back, his jaw wired shut by pride. My palms sweated through the pen. Aaron Mercer said, "What happens to him now?" The judge watched me with winter eyes. Judge Lila Hart said, "Protective custody, pending verification." The words lodged like stones. Marcus Reed said, "He is not yours." The clerk frowned at the echo. Aaron Mercer said, "Someone left him for me." Judge Lila Hart said, "Then someone expects you to decide." The gavel did not fall, but it felt like thunder landing on my ribs. I walked out to the courthouse steps where the rain had paused, and the city smelled rinsed but not clean. Pastor Nathan Graham waited with a folded umbrella like a flag of truce. Pastor Nathan Graham said, "You look like a man who saw a ghost." I stared at the traffic light blinking red over a dead crosswalk. Aaron Mercer said, "They named him Michael." The pastor's mouth closed on a prayer that never formed. Pastor Nathan Graham said, "Names return to us, and they ask a price." The wind lifted old flyers from the gutter. Aaron Mercer said, "I was not ready to pay." A siren rose and fell, and the day did not decide to help us. Pastor Nathan Graham said, "Then choose what the name means, not what it takes." Back at the chapel, the flowers had sagged, and the air had learned the baby's tune. Nurse Elena Park waited by the side door with the bundle and the note, and her eyes held a line I could not cross. Nurse Elena Park said, "No one has come forward." The paper crinkled as she offered it to me again. Aaron Mercer said, "Read it once more." She nodded, steady because someone had to be. Nurse Elena Park said, "For Aaron Mercer. His name is Michael." The room folded into that sentence, and every memory of my brother sharpened like frost. Aaron Mercer said, "Then I will carry him until we find the truth." The baby squeaked like a hinge and gripped my finger. Somewhere a door closed, and the world changed shape to fit his name. The apartment smelled like cardboard and rain, and the heat clicked. Baby Michael hiccuped in the borrowed carrier, and my hands shook. Aaron Mercer said, "I am not the man they expect." The window hummed with traffic like a tired choir. I stood in the thin kitchen and counted bottles, as if numbers could save us. Aaron Mercer said, "I never asked for a mirror I cannot dodge." The ceiling stain looked like a map with no legend. I remembered my brother laughing with a cracked tooth and brave eyes. Aaron Mercer said, I left when you needed me most. The carrier rustled, and the sound pulled breath back into me. Aaron Mercer said, I will not run this time. A siren washed the room red. Then let us go. I pressed my palm to the note and waited for courage to answer. The hospital quiet room felt like a pause carved from noise. Nurse Elena Park folded the note once more, and her face settled. Nurse Elena Park said, Fear means you are awake. I could not sit. The chair scraped like a reprimand and stopped me. Aaron Mercer said, My father left before names meant anything. Her gaze held steady, not kind, not cruel. Nurse Elena Park said, What matters now is what you carry. Memories flickered of late rent, late apologies, late calls to my brother. Aaron Mercer said, He covered me when I broke things. The note lay between us like a verdict. Nurse Elena Park said, You can be different. The clock ticked, refusing drama, insisting time. Aaron Mercer said, Then teach me how to stand. Pastor Nathan Graham unlocked the church office and let the dark breathe. Dust drifted like slow confetti in the desk lamp cone. Pastor Nathan Graham said, You look like you owe us storm money. I traced the spine of a hymn book with a thumb. Aaron Mercer said, I was always the second try at everything. He listened the way old wood listens. Pastor Nathan Graham said, Love is not graded on time served. I stared at the photo of last Easter. My brother smiling behind a grill. Aaron Mercer said, He forgave me too easily. The pastor closed a drawer with a soft click. Pastor Nathan Graham said, Grace is unfair, or it is nothing. I swallowed a splinter of shame and felt it move. Aaron Mercer said, Then let it be unfair to me now. Dawn thinned the fog over the cemetery and made the grass glitter. The world sounded like it had swallowed its own echo. I set the carrier on the granite base and steadied it. Aaron Mercer said, I owe you a story you cannot hear. The name on the stone burned colder than the air. Aaron Mercer said, They gave him your name, and I shook. A crow walked like a judge along the path and did not rule. Aaron Mercer said, I was the mess you cleaned without complaint. The fog lifted in torn scarves and showed more stones. Aaron Mercer said, I am still afraid, but I am here. The carrier creaked, and the tiny breath within it steamed. I kept my hands on the handles like reins. By noon, the apartment warmed, and fear learned to sit down. I washed tiny bottles like relics and lined them up for inspection. Aaron Mercer said, We start with what is small. The kettle clicked and forgot it was loud. I read a pamphlet twice and trusted none of it. Aaron Mercer said, You will teach me your language. The carrier rocked with a foot tap I did not notice. A draft moved the note as if it wanted out. Aaron Mercer said, You do not owe me a future, but I owe you a present. I practiced the name until my mouth believed it. Aaron Mercer said, Michael, stay. The room felt less temporary, like a decision had picked a chair. I opened the window and let the rain air in. The phone rang until it felt like a warning, and when I answered, my mother's voice cracked like old paint. Evelyn Mercer said, You should not keep him. I sat by the window, watching rain race itself down the glass. Aaron Mercer said, He carries Michael's name. Her silence bled through the line, thicker than any word. Evelyn Mercer said, That is not yours to hold. I pressed my forehead to the cold glass. Aaron Mercer said, He was left for me. She sighed the way only years can sigh. Evelyn Mercer said, You were always breaking things. The dial tone rose when she hung up, and it sounded like judgment echoing through wires I could not cut. At the diner, Marcus Reed waited in a booth with coffee untouched, his tie too tight for truth. Marcus Reed said, You cannot drag this child into your ruin. The neon light buzzed like a bad memory. I slid into the seat, shoulders heavier than plates. Aaron Mercer said, You think ruin is new to me? He smirked the way knives smirk. Marcus Reed said, Names do not make you worthy. The waitress refilled his cup but looked only at me. Aaron Mercer said, "He deserves better than silence." Marcus Reed leaned close enough for breath to sting. Marcus Reed said, "Then leave him to me." I gripped the fork until my hand hurt and let the air thicken with things I did not say. Back home, the hallway echoed with whispers from neighbors, their words seeping like mildew through cracked plaster. A woman's voice said, "That baby is cursed." A man muttered, "It is not right." My chest burned with every syllable. Aaron Mercer said, "Let them choke on their gossip." I carried Michael past peeling paint and eyes that would not meet mine. His tiny breath steadied my shaking hands. Aaron Mercer said, "You are not their curse." The elevator groaned, carrying us up like reluctant mercy. Each floor felt like judgment counting itself. Aaron Mercer said, "You are my truth." At the lawyer's office, the clock clicked louder than his pen. Lydia Cole said, "Custody is fragile without proof." The blinds cut sunlight into hard bars across the desk. Aaron Mercer said, "Proof feels like betrayal." She removed her glasses with the calm of someone who has seen too many broken promises. Lydia Cole said, "What feels like betrayal may save him." My throat dried into silence. She slid a folder toward me, its weight out of proportion to paper. Lydia Cole said, "Fight or surrender. Those are the only two paths." I stared at the folder until it blurred, and my reflection stared back, asking if I had any fight left. That night, the city hummed outside my window, but inside the silence pressed harder. I held Michael close, his heartbeat quick but steady. Aaron Mercer said, "I am more afraid of failing you than of them." My brother's photo on the wall leaned in with accusation I deserved. Aaron Mercer said, "I never finished anything but mistakes." The baby shifted, and his fist gripped my shirt. Aaron Mercer said, "Maybe you will teach me how to finish." The night leaned on us, heavy and uninvited. I rocked him until his breath evened, and for the first time, fear bent into something that looked almost like resolve. The letter arrived folded twice, its corners bent like secrets trying to hide. My hands shook before I even read. Aaron Mercer said, "Why now?" The words sprawled across the page, sharp and hurried. It said Michael's child was not his, but mine to keep. My breath broke, like glass under weight. Aaron Mercer said, "This cannot be true." I traced the ink and felt it burn. Evelyn Mercer's name signed at the bottom, her truth bleeding across paper. Aaron Mercer said, "She knew all along." The baby stirred, restless as if he too had heard. I felt the world shift its floor beneath me, and trust collapse in its silence. I stormed into the house that still smelled of my childhood, the air thick with dust and regret. Evelyn Mercer stood by the mantel, clutching rosary beads like armor. Aaron Mercer said, "You lied." Her lips thinned into steel. Evelyn Mercer said, "It was not your burden to bear." My chest felt like a furnace with no escape. Aaron Mercer said, "You let me bury him without truth." She turned toward the window where rain blurred the garden. Evelyn Mercer said, "Secrets kept families from burning." I slammed my fist against the frame. Aaron Mercer said, "You burned us anyway." Marcus Reed waited in the doorway like a shadow grown teeth. Marcus Reed said, "So you know." His grin was thin as razors. My stomach twisted. Aaron Mercer said, "You knew too." He nodded with smug patience. Marcus Reed said, "I am his father." The words dropped like chains. My throat closed, searching for air. Aaron Mercer said, "You let me believe it was mine." His smirk widened. Marcus Reed said, "It always was about control." The baby's cry from the carrier cut through the house, shattering what I thought remained unbroken. The truth clawed at me, tearing years of memory open. I saw my brother's laughter the night he vanished, and the silence he left behind. Aaron Mercer said, "You betrayed him and me." Marcus Reed shrugged, careless as smoke. Marcus Reed said, "I survived. He did not." My hands shook with rage I could not swallow. Aaron Mercer said, "You are poison." He leaned closer, eyes sharp with triumph. Marcus Reed said, "You are too weak to keep him." The words branded me, and yet they sparked something harder, a defiance growing where grief had once drowned me. That night I stood in the rain outside the church, soaked to the bone, clutching the note that had begun it all. Pastor Nathan Graham opened the door, his eyes full of questions. Aaron Mercer said, "They lied. They all lied." He placed a hand on my shoulder, heavy as stone but warm. Pastor Nathan Graham said, "Truth destroys, but it also remakes." I looked at the baby, his tiny face half asleep, unaware of the storm he carried. Aaron Mercer said, "Then let it remake me." The rain fell harder, and I let it, as if it could wash away what had been broken. The courtroom swelled with whispers as though the walls themselves judged. Judge Lila Hart raised her gavel, steady and merciless. Judge Lila Hart said, "Order." Marcus Reed stood tall, smirk sharp enough to cut glass. Marcus Reed said, "He cannot protect what is mine." My chest pulsed with fury. Aaron Mercer said, "You abandoned him before breath began." The baby's carrier sat beside me, fragile as a promise. My mother would not look at me, her eyes carved from stone. Evelyn Mercer said, "He is not yours." My throat burned raw. Aaron Mercer said, "He is my choice." The gavel fell, splitting silence into shards that clung to every ear. The lawyer's words sliced air like scalpels, measured but cruel. Lydia Cole said, "Mr. Mercer has neither stability nor proof." I gripped the table until my knuckles whitened. Aaron Mercer said, "I have what matters, presence." Marcus Reed laughed low, triumphant. Marcus Reed said, "Presence fades, blood does not." My pulse roared like a storm in my ears. I saw the judge's pen hover over her notes, the weight of ink heavier than justice. Aaron Mercer said, "Love is proof enough." The gallery hissed with derision, voices stacking against me. I leaned toward the carrier, whispering to Michael, not caring who heard. Aaron Mercer said, "I will not let them erase you." My mother took the stand, her rosary glinting under pale lights. Evelyn Mercer said, "Aaron has always been reckless." My stomach sank. Aaron Mercer said, "You buried the truth until it rotted." Her face flickered, guilt and pride wrestling like shadows in her eyes. Evelyn Mercer said, "I only wanted to shield us." I stepped forward, voice breaking. Aaron Mercer said, "Shield or smother, which was it?" The courtroom leaned in, breathless. Her silence answered louder than words. My body shook, every scar inside burning at once. Aaron Mercer said, "You betrayed us both." Her gaze faltered at last, the beads slipping from her hand like stones falling into deep water. Marcus Reed rose with the arrogance of a victor and stretched his hand toward the carrier. Marcus Reed said, "He belongs with me." My blood boiled. Aaron Mercer said, "You belong only to your pride." He sneered, sharp and hollow. Marcus Reed said, "I will raise him strong." I stepped between his hand and Michael, trembling but unmoved. Aaron Mercer said, "You will not touch him." The gavel cracked against wood, but the sound drowned beneath my voice. Aaron Mercer said, "I claim him, not because I must, but because I will." The baby stirred, a small cry piercing the storm, silencing every whisper in the room. Chaos folded into silence when the judge leaned forward, her voice heavy as iron. Judge Lila Hart said, "This court cannot decide hearts, only law." My breath froze. She raised her hand, gavel hovering. Judge Lila Hart said, "Until blood is proven, custody remains contested." The world tilted, every word carving deeper. Aaron Mercer said, "Then test me." My voice cracked but stood. Evelyn Mercer sobbed quietly, broken at last. Marcus Reed glared, fury bottled. I lifted Michael, his warmth steadying my shaking frame. Aaron Mercer said, He will know who I am, whatever the verdict. The gavel struck, echoing like thunder that would not end. The storm passed, leaving the city glazed with silence, yet my chest still thundered. I walked the streets with Michael pressed close, the courthouse echo trailing me. Aaron Mercer said, "They will measure me by failures, but you will measure me by presence." The neon signs flickered half dead, casting the sidewalk in bruised colors. My shoes struck puddles that reflected our faces, mine gaunt, his untouched. Aaron Mercer said, "You carry my brother's name, but you are not his shadow." The wind whispered down the alley, carrying gossip that could no longer touch us. I tightened my grip and felt something solid where fear once lived. Back in the apartment, I set the carrier on the table like an altar and stared at the note again. Its words had not changed. But I had. Aaron Mercer said, "Paper cannot define us." Petal hissed, softer now, like an ally instead of a reprimand. I folded the note and slid it into a drawer, burying its weight under dishes and bills. Aaron Mercer said, "Names wound, but they also heal." Michael stirred, eyes fluttering open as if to agree. I leaned close, whispering to a face too young to know, but old enough to change me. Aaron Mercer said, "We start over here." At the church, Pastor Nathan Graham unlocked the side door and let me inside, where candles flickered in quiet rows. The air smelled of wax and dust, familiar as regret. Pastor Nathan Graham said, "Storms leave scars, but scars can guide." I lowered Michael onto a pew, his breathing steady. Aaron Mercer said, "I am not strong enough alone." He placed a hand on my shoulder, firm as oak. Pastor Nathan Graham said, "Strength is not solitude." The candles wavered, and the silence settled like absolution. I bowed my head, not in prayer but in surrender to something larger than shame. Evelyn Mercer sat at her kitchen table, eyes hollow, rosary coiled loose. I stood in the doorway, Michael asleep in my arms. Aaron Mercer said, "I wanted to hate you." She looked up, and for once her gaze was not stone but ash. Evelyn Mercer said, "I wanted to protect you from the truth." My voice cracked but did not break. Aaron Mercer said, "You broke us instead." Her tears fell without fight, each drop carving deeper lines. Evelyn Mercer said, "I am sorry." I lowered Michael so she could see his tiny face. Aaron Mercer said, "Then let sorrow become something useful." That night, I sat with Michael in the apartment, window open to the quiet city. The air smelled of rain but carried no threat. I held him close, his hand clutching my finger with surprising strength. Aaron Mercer said, "You are not burden, you are anchor." The city hummed like a softer hymn, not sharp but steady. My reflection in the glass looked older, steadier, like someone new. Aaron Mercer said, "If I falter, you will remind me." He sighed, curling against me, and his breath warmed away the cold. I whispered once more, softer than a vow. Aaron Mercer said, "We belong to each other now." The morning was too quiet, a silence that pressed against my ribs as if waiting for a verdict. I laid Michael in his carrier, the straps snug around his small frame. Aaron Mercer said, "The world will not welcome us kindly." Outside, traffic hissed on wet streets and church bells tolled without mercy. I lifted the folded note once more and felt its edges cut. Aaron Mercer said, "But I will welcome you, every breath, every day." His tiny fingers twitched, reaching for air. The fear that once defined me shifted, replaced by a strange clarity. I whispered into the quiet. Aaron Mercer said, "You are mine, even if the law never agrees." At the park, the air smelled of wet earth, and children's laughter floated like ghosts of a life not mine. I sat on the bench, Michael resting against my chest. Aaron Mercer said, "One day you will ask why your name carries two graves." The swings creaked without wind, a rhythm of memory. My eyes burned as I held him tighter. Aaron Mercer said, I will tell you that your name was never curse, only wait. Clouds drifted heavy, but sunlight pierced small gaps, streaking us in gold. Aaron Mercer said, and I carried it because I carried you. His soft breath warmed my collar, and for a moment, the world seemed less cruel. At the church, candles flickered against stained glass washed in twilight. Pastor Nathan Graham stood at the altar, watching as I approached with Michael. Pastor Nathan Graham said, "Have you chosen?" My voice felt like gravel in my throat. Aaron Mercer said, "I choose to stay no matter the cost." His eyes softened with quiet relief. Pastor Nathan Graham said, "Then he will know you by what you keep, not what you lose." I looked down at Michael, his small chest rising with untroubled rhythm. Aaron Mercer said, "Then let him know me by love." The words rang truer than any hymn, and silence became sacred. Evelyn Mercer sat alone on her porch, the rosary limp in her lap when I approached. She looked up, eyes hollow but wet. Evelyn Mercer said, "I cannot undo what I have done." My arms tightened around Michael. "Miley, Shelby T." Aaron Mercer said, "You cannot, but you can watch me do better." Her shoulders sagged, as though surrender had replaced strength. Evelyn Mercer said, "Then let me see him." For a moment, I hesitated, then lowered Michael so her gaze could soften. Aaron Mercer said, "He will not know your lies, only your face." She wept openly, her tears dripping onto her palms, and I let her weep. Night folded over the city, and I stood by the window, Michael asleep against my chest. The hum of neon lights painted our faces in blue and gold. Aaron Mercer said, "They tried to take you from me." I touched his tiny hand, fingers curling into mine. Aaron Mercer said, "But you will always know who I am." The silence grew thick, almost holy. My reflection in the glass was not the man I had been, but someone reforged in fire and grief. I whispered one final vow, soft enough to vanish into the hum. Aaron Mercer said, "We end here, but we begin together."